Hello Minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor, and I think I got a treat for you today. I hope it is. I'm going to start a new series, and that series is called Palette Picks. Now the idea behind this actually germinated in my brain about 3 years ago, and there are a lot of palettes out there, a lot of pre-made palette. Most of those palettes are designed to be sort of all-purpose, but I've really kind of become fascinating with the choices that professional artists or notable artists have chosen for themselves. So I want to start looking at some of those palettes, but more than just review the colors. There are a lot of channels on YouTube that review actual colors. Some do a really great job. I don't need to repeat that work. I think many of my viewers know who those channels are and can go to those channels for some really great reference material. I'm a painter, and I like to get into the practicalities of how these work in actual painting situations. And I'm fascinated to see different colors and just try different colors that I've never tried before, or try colors that I have used many times before but use them in different ways. And this has really stretched me and grown me in my sense of using colors, choosing colors for palettes, and in the work that I do. But as a YouTube artist, and I'm trying to bring information to you, and as someone who really has not in the past explored color a lot, I really want to get into learning more about colors, but more specifically why artists pick particular colors. So this is going to be a series. It may be in studio, it might be landscape, portrait, it might be botanical, but you will see the keyword associated with some of those episodes, palette picks. I may be doing different things, maybe painting different things in different locations, but if I label it as a palette pick episode, it will be using a choice of colors picked by different artists, and I'm exploring those choices. And you may see me use the same palette in more than one episode. Now this one, I actually bought this a few years ago and have been using it, and I'm going to link to 2 other landscape videos that I've done where I've used this palette. I just don't think in one episode I can say, well, here's this palette and here's what I think is good for or not good for. And that's really not my goal. My goal is to explore these colors, maybe why they chose them, what are the common choices. In other words, you're going to find colors on this palette that match many artists or come close to many artists across the spectrum. Then you're going to find some unique maybe choices, or you're going to see some tendencies that artists make when they choose palettes. It'll get you thinking as to why. So this is the Marilyn Garber palette. This was a limited edition palette sold by Wet Paint in Minnesota. The palette is not available, but all the colors are, so you could easily put this palette together again if you wanted to. The choices that Marilyn Garber made were these top 2 rows, these 12 colors. This was a Schmincke palette that holds 18 colors. Now I chose these last 6, and this was out of the new Schmincke range that they introduced a couple of years ago. I chose these colors to add to this because I needed some earthier tones and to make this more suitable to a landscape palette. Marilyn Garber is a botanical artist. So just a little bit about Marilyn Garber. She's the founder of the Minnesota School of Botanical Art, past president, vice president, co-chair of the Educational Committee of the American Society of Botanical Artists. That's no small deal. She's taught in many venues, including the University of Minnesota and across the world, places like London and Thailand, Panama City. She takes a very traditional, almost scientific approach to botanical. I would call it almost illustration, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. But first, let's just go through the colors that she chose. Lemon yellow, Indian yellow. Those are 2 pretty common picks. Cobalt azure, which is pretty much a cerulean blue color. French ultramarine blue, also extremely common. Delft blue, very much like an anthracnone or indanthrone blue. These next 2 choices were interesting. Brilliant red violet and brilliant blue violet. Both of these are fluorescent colors, they're not pigmented colors. Now I don't have any information as to her rationale for choosing the various colors. I call her an illustrator because it's fairly typical of illustrators to be less concerned with fluorescent or dye-based colors. That's the only thing I can think of. It didn't matter to me when I bought this palette because I knew I would primarily only use this for sketchbook plein air work, and I have. but I imagine a lot of her work is reproduced for print, and perhaps she doesn't display the originals. I don't know. Just know that me personally, I would not choose those colors since I do produce some work that will be framed, and I don't like to buy two sets of supplies. For the time being, let's not think about or talk about light fast. Let's look at the color choices, which I think are solid, which is this red violet and this blue violet. Then May Green, and as I've used this palette, that turned out to be a very important key color. Perylene Green, Cadmium Red Light, Quinacridone Red Light, Ruby Red. Now the 6 colors that I added were Transparent Ochre, Saturn Red, Transparent Sienna, Mahogany Brown, Green Umber, and Graphite Gray. My thinking behind these was just a sort of a yellow earth tone, a orange earth tone, and a red earth tone. Saturn Red, which is an orange, is between the Indian Yellow and the Cadmium Light. Green Umber, which is sort of a sepia-like color. I like having a warm neutral that I can use as a muting factor, and Graphite Gray, which I use as a neutral tint. So those are the colors I added. So I'm going to do a line and wash botanical for you today, and we're just going to put these colors to use. Well, we'll start out looking at some of my reference material here. Going to do a dogwood bloom and some of the new dogwood leaf forms as they came up. And this is my maple reference, the seeds and the newly emerging leaves. And I really would just do a composite of elements of all of those. Kind of drawing my own composition as I often do, just using those to guide me. And I go pretty tight here with a pencil. Just I want to get all the detail worked out so I don't have to think about it. And I'm going to go in with an ink line. You'll see that here in a minute. Now I'm doing a fairly simple ink line approach, meaning I'm not doing a lot of ink shading. I'm doing mostly outlining and some interior hatching features or detail features using a line. So how much ink you put into a line and wash is really up to you, and I'm also keeping it very, very fine. But it becomes, from this point on, almost just a coloring activity. And because the ink lines are so fine, they don't stand out heavily. Now on the top one I decided to add some background because that blossom is nearly white and I wanted to do something in the background to give it a little bit of pop. So I'm bringing in some of that brilliant violet mixed with some of the Perylene green, and they neutralize each other really well, but the violet cast is really nice in the background, and I actually was seeing some of that in the photo. And I'm also going to bring in some of the green, but just a nice soft, not real deep, just a little bit of a pastel, nebulous, out of focus background. I think I dabbed a little bit of the May green in there too, but it's mostly just Perylene green. Those greens were an interesting choice, not my usual choice, but interesting and nice to work with, I thought. I like the Perylene green a lot. Just a nice way to neutralize all sorts of colors, mixed with yellow, mixed with the May green, mixed with this violet that I'm using here. Now here you can see my main leaf green was the May green, that bright green. My normal choice for a green like this is sort of a nickel azo yellow or an azo green, kind of blued up where I need it in shade, or more of a blue green, blued up with phthalo or Prussian blue. So up there you can see I'm using more of the Indian yellow. There were tinges of all sorts of colors in these leaves, and that's what's fun, is to bring those out, not make these look monochromatic. And with her palette, it was really easy to do that. You know, bend it towards the lemon yellow, bend it towards the May green, gray it down or subdue it a little bit with the Perylene green. The Delft blue I thought was a good addition to the green. If I needed a more bluer green, I thought that it worked a little better than the Ultramarine. But now in these dogwood flowers, they're mostly white, but when they're newly emerged or they first come out, they have a lot of green tinges in them. Just lighter shades of that same sort of May green. So I'm doing some of that, keeping it very, very pale. The May green mixed with Perylene green, sometimes with Delft blue, and vary the mixture as I go around. Not my normal choice, but very serviceable blues and greens. I think I'm even bringing some of the Cobalt Azure in there. Trying to keep the dogwood bloom very, very light. There were tinges of red too around the outer edge, so bringing in a little of the cadmium red, and I think down to the earth tones some of the transparent sienna. Now as I got into the stems, these brought more in the colors that I chose on this palette. Her palette is challenging to mix browns. It can be done, but you know, I decided to go for the convenience colors I chose. I used a base of the mahogany brown mixed with a little bit of brilliant violet. I'm bringing some of the ruby red into it and some of the transparent ochre, just to vary it from a red brown to a yellow brown. And there were even tinges of green in the actual stems. So I wanted to make sure all of that was sort of showing and variegating to give it some real life. And as most branches are, they're shadowed on the underneath side. Now I'm just going back and adding some dimension to the leaves, some shading, some shadowing, just to get that curl and undulation, you know, working into 3D space. Just muted mixtures, Perylene green, Delft blue, some of the May green. A lot of Marilyn Garber's work is very soft in the greens, and so I think the palette she chose did a good job in letting the greens be very soft and subtle, colorful but not too brilliant. The Cobalt Azure, bringing that in with some lemon yellow and Indian yellow, made for a slightly different but nice soft green. Now we're moving down to the maple, and I used about the same mixture. There was less green and red in the stem for the maple, so it's mostly the mahogany brown and some of the brilliant blue violet. And I will go back and add tinges of red and all that sort of gnarly nodule texture that's on the branches. These stems on these seed pods were very red. They don't show too brilliantly red here because of the line, the ink line that I have. More of the May green mixture. Some Perylene green again. A little bit of Delft blue here and there. Again, my choice for a base yellow green would have been more of a green gold, like a Nicolazo yellow, for instance. But the May green worked really well, so I was very pleased. Gave me a brilliant green when I needed it. Could be muted very easily. And the one green I was missing out of this palette was like a phthalo blue green shade, or maybe even a phthalo green or Prussian blue. But you know, you adjust, and what she had worked really well. Now there are tinges of red down here in these seed pods, especially in the little blades. So most of that is ruby red, some transparent sienna, but mostly ruby red. Especially where the seed part itself was. That actually got fairly brilliant red, and I used both the Quinacridone red light, the ruby red, and even some tinges of the brilliant red violet in the deeper tones. But I think accurately reflects the actual botanical sample that I had photographed. You know, playing with greens are fun. Many of you may have seen my episodes on green, where I advocate steering clear of sap green. Nothing wrong with sap green. It's a beautiful color. It's just, especially for beginners, it tends to be overused because it's so close to a natural foliage green. I would rather get sort of a blue-green to a yellow-green out on the palette with some other modifiers and just mix it around, let it all mingle. You get so much livelier greens when you do that. So while we're talking about greens, let me just do a quick sidebar here. And, you know, we're, as realistic landscape painters or floral painters or whatever you do, if you're going for realistic, naturalistic looks, we're not paint-by-number artists. It may be confusing when I say keep your greens lively. And this can work for a whole range of colors. I tend to harp on greens because landscape has so much of it, especially during the spring and summer months, and we tend to paint a lot of greens. So if you don't keep it lively, your greens will look dull or lifeless or monotonous. So I just want you to take a look at my palette here for a minute. This is my green. These are my greens, not these. This is made up of these, but this is where my greens are found. And I tend to kind of quadrant out an area when I'm working on a palette. So I've got lemon yellow up here, I've got a little bit of Indian yellow over here, I've got a little bit of the Cobalt Azure up here, some of the Delft blue over here, the Perylene green down here, I've got some of the brilliant red violet down here. And I can bend the mixture all sorts of ways and keep it variegated depending on what I see and how I want it to look. So that's the way I keep my greens lively, and I just wanted to mention that in case that was confusing to you. Well, I hope these color choices gave you some ideas. Maybe it pinpointed some colors you'd like to try. Maybe it confirmed some colors that you had but were using differently. I want to give that a try. These colors in particular I hope will inspire you to do some spring botanical painting. See what you can come up with there and just try some various mixes. Just remember to keep those mixes lively. Mix blues with yellow greens, blue greens with yellow greens, mute it with reds, brown it with oranges. Just get a whole pool of color out there and fool around with it and see what you can do. Make those greens lively. Thanks everyone. Appreciate you watching. Thank you so much, patrons, for supporting this channel and making this content possible. We will see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.